Welcome everyone. Today's presentation is part of the Culture Builds Communities webinar series. This community-based project is designed to help Native communities plan and develop cultural facilities. Culture Builds Communities is a project of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. Major funding is provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Museum of the American Indian, and Margaret A. Cargill Philanthropies. Thank you very much, Don, for being here today.
You bet, my pleasure. So welcome. I'm happy to be a part of this. I'm honored to have been asked to come and present 3 different webinars, helping talk about, work with you on how to raise funds for cultural buildings. And so it's my pleasure to be part of this process. And I hope we can make this relatively informal. I know it's a little more difficult with doing this remotely, but I teach at Evergreen State College, and I'm used to having people raise their hand or ask a question, both figuratively and literally using the tools that are part of Zoom. So feel free to ask questions. There'll be time at the end of the presentation for questions as well. And we'll try to do some catch up if need be during the next session next week. Just to give a little bit of background about me, I established a company called Sparrowhawk Consulting Company back in 1984 and started my work with tribes and tribal organizations in 1976 as a volunteer helping restore the Siletz tribe of Oregon to full tribal status. At that time, just to give you an idea, that was restoring 3,500 acres of land and hunting and fishing rights. And if you look at the Siletz tribe now with the casino on the Oregon coast and all the other buildings that have been built, it's really a happy experience to be able to see that perspective and to see how tribes have grown and developed so much over the years. Worked with a lot of different tribes around the country, Ho-Chunk in Wisconsin, of course Rosebud, which was kind of a home tribe for me in South Dakota, and most of the major Northwest tribes out this way. And like I mentioned, I also serve as an adjunct faculty member at the Evergreen State College. I've also taught at Sintagaleska College, now University in Rosewood, South Dakota, Oregon State University, University of Oregon, and a variety of other institutions. So I enjoy this kind of work, and I'm pleased once again to be a part of this process. A little bit of contact information for you there. There's an email and a phone number if you need it. And happy to respond to individual questions via email or phone. My students are oftentimes texting me, which is kind of a very right now kind of approach to getting information back and forth. Part of our work as Sparrowhawk Consulting and also with a company called Thunderhawk LLC is to help identify and secure funding for cultural facilities. And for example, you'll see this again. This is the House of Knowledge Longhouse facility at the Port Gamble S'Klallam tribe. And it's a 35-foot panel there that was carved and made the backdrop for the longhouse at that facility. So that was an exciting thing. We'll learn more about that, talk more about that later in the presentation. So what we're looking at is basically an overview. This first class or this first program is an overview of fundraising processes, some of the things that you would do to kind of get ready to raise funds, but really focusing in on some case studies of successful tribes and how they raised millions of dollars for their projects. We're going to spend the next class, the second class of a series of 3, talking about capacity building. How do you organize, how do you create the capacity to be successful in raising the funds needed to build these buildings? And then the third class will be really focusing on the nuts and bolts of running a capital campaign and how tribes have made that process work well for them. So it's going to be a pretty comprehensive approach, I think, over the course of the 3 classes. We'll touch on some things today that we'll talk in more detail about in the following classes. So if you don't feel like you got all you needed to know about that particular facet of the work, recognize that there may be opportunities to follow up, like I said, and provide more detailed information in the second and third programs. part of this has to do with how tribes and nonprofit organizations have benefited from these community activities. And I think that's really important because I know you know this, but I think it's important to emphasize that the buildings, in my view, are tools to accomplish a broader or a larger purpose. And I'll talk about that some more when we get to the Port Gamble example. But the buildings, in my view, in my opinion, shouldn't be seen as sort of ends to the goal is not necessarily just the building. The building provides a service to the community, and it creates change within that community. And I think that's really important to recognize. And the examples I can show you today illustrate that exactly. They illustrate how once the building is built, the impact they can have on the community can be huge. So in terms of steps, let's sort of think about what you might do to begin this process. One of the things that people sometimes skip over is the idea of developing a community assessment plan, right? How do you go out and identify the needs and the assets that your community has as part of your planning process? And I'm sure that some of you have engaged in some of this activity as part of your overall effort to build your culturally appropriate building. But I wanted to kind of go through some of the steps that you might consider as part of a community assessment activity. And the good news is that if you do an effective community assessment, you'll develop the data that's required to help convince funders that this is an important project that should get their support. So even though this might seem like extra work in some respect, it pays big dividends when it comes to developing the case, if you will, for your culturally appropriate building. So for example, as part of this process, including the data that you can generate, I know, for example, the Longhouse at Port Gamble required us, because of our applying under a block grant, to illustrate that 85% of the beneficiaries of that Longhouse would be low and moderate income people. At that time, that was the HUD requirement. So that was a requirement for the purposes of we had to be able to demonstrate that if you give us some funds to help build this Longhouse facility, that the beneficiaries will be 85% low and moderate income. But that was also a condition of even being able to apply for the grant. If we couldn't show that data, we weren't even eligible to apply on behalf of the tribe. So data can be really important in helping make the case, but it can also give you eligibility to for example, apply for a block grant, depending on the standard. And I think the standard for who this building serves has shifted some from 85% to 50% low and moderate income, but that does tend to change somewhat over time. The other thing you can include are surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And as I think many of you know, those kinds of activities are labor intensive. I can remember doing a survey for the Puyallup tribe, and they wanted every member of the tribe to be surveyed, 2,953 members. I remember that number because we had to send out 2,953 surveys to the mailing address of every member of the tribe. So surveys can be also a very powerful tool when it comes to having the community step up and say through the survey, this building is important to us. Having this building, having this facility is an important part of developing our community, of reflecting and respecting our past and looking toward our future. Same thing with interviews, right? Key informant interviews might also serve as a way of supporting your argument that this building is needed. And typically it's key informant interviews. It's people that are seen as opinion leaders, for example, in your community, that might be able to provide insights about why the building's important and how it will provide service to the people. And then of course, finally, focus groups, 6 to 8 people in an hour session where you're asking consistent questions can also help you illustrate the need for your building and show community support. And the thing that I think most of us have used most regularly is just community gatherings, where you're kind of doing an interview focus group process with the broader community. And I can tell you the number of times I've enjoyed gooey duck stew at Port Gamble when we did community meetings as a way of, gooey duck stew with fried bread and all the fixings. It was really delicious, but it was also a chance to get the community directly involved and get the community voice. And I would add that in terms of focus groups and community gatherings, we always will spend time with the elders first to make sure that the elders' voice is heard and creates context for any kind of community assessment activity that we might do. So these are things for you to think about that might be a way to move toward a community assessment activity that, again, will give you the benefit of creating data, but also creating support for your project. And these are just real quickly, I want to go through these 6 steps. These 6 steps are reflected in a handbook that's in your packet of materials. And I think Melissa will give you that link that will share all these materials with you. So you'll have the benefit of what this is all about. These 6 steps are basically define the scope. How broadly do you want to assess the community? What do you mean when you say community? Is it just the tribal membership within the community? Is it non-native and other native people within the community that you want to take a look at? What's the scope of your community assessment process? And then do you want to go solo or do you want to collaborate? And sometimes it makes sense to collaborate with other organizations, maybe a local county museum or some other group that could also benefit from that community assessment. So working to make that decision about, no, we're just gonna focus in on, our tribal community, and we're gonna do it ourselves. Okay, that's you making that decision. I know back with the Puyallup example, with that community assessment activity, they chose to focus just on tribal members within the reservation community and those living outside of the reservation community. And then the collecting the data, step 3, is kind of what I talked about in the earlier slide. Using secondary information from the census, using other data you can generate. Hopefully the tribe or your organization has access to some data that will help. The good news is that the census now provides some census information by tribe. And we found that to be very useful. It's called a CCD. For example, we identified the Swinomish Indian Tribal Community, CCD, as a specific census data set for that tribe, and that can be really, really useful. Determine key findings. Yeah, what are the things that you've learned through this process? Set priorities and create an action plan for moving forward. And then, of course, sharing your findings. It works really well if you share your findings with the community that's helped you create those findings. It kind of rewards them for being actively involved in your process. And again, the guide to community assessment is available to you in the packet of materials. And I think I'll go ahead and just make a reference to that. And this is what it looks like. So, if you would like to, it's a really, really good guide to do conducting a community assessment. I think you'll find it useful, and it will be part of the packet that Melissa shares with you. This is a little hard to see, and I'm sorry that it's a little harder to read, but this is basically working toward a development of your program or project description. This is just a little tool that I created that we've used with other tribal organizations that have helped them focus in on what the projects all entailed. And I know some of you are already way ahead of this process, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to go back and take a look and say, what is this? What is the project? What is the project? And I know, for example, at Port Gamble, they said, we want you to help us raise money for a longhouse at $1.2 million. Well, it ultimately cost $1.9 million, but that's kind of another story. I said, the money you'll spend to raise $1.2 million, right, is not much more than you'd spend if you wanted to raise $5 million. And I said, well, can you tell me what else do you need? And they said the longhouse, an education and career and education center, an elder center, and a library. We need all 4 of those buildings. And so that's how we define the project for them. So having that conversation, articulating your program or project can also help you identify what are the real needs that need to be addressed and what makes sense when it comes to developing your project description. In that case, we'll learn, I'll show you, they did raise $5 million to build all 4 buildings there at Little Boston Harbor on the Port Gamble Reservation. So who's going to, a brief description of the project, the target timeline for each of the components. What makes up this project that you should take into consideration? Who are the departments that should be involved in this initiative? And what are the outcomes you would expect to have come from this particular initiative? And then a rough estimate of your first year and ongoing costs. And that's especially important for building buildings, because as we all know, operations and maintenance expense once the building is built is a major concern, not only for your organization and your tribe, but also for funders who might consider funding your building construction costs. They're going to want to know, what's it going to cost to keep this thing running, and who's going to pay for that, right? That's a pretty important question to address. And then who's your team going to be? Who will be part of your team that will carry out this project? That's all part of this program description that I'm talking about. And the next thing I wanted to touch on is researching funding sources. I know many of you are from different parts of the country, but out our way, a survey was done of the funders in our region and how successful were people who applied to them. And what they found out was 60% the applications submitted to Northwest funders were outside the state guidelines of those funders. Okay, those grant requests are going nowhere. Right? They ask for operating funds, the funder doesn't do operating funds. They ask for money for endowment, the funder doesn't do endowment. So 60%, 3/5 of the grants submitted to these folks are outside the stated guidelines. So it's really important that you spend the time identifying funding sources and not wasting time submitting applications for funding sources that aren't interested or wouldn't be able to help you with funding. And what I'm saying is, in our practice, when we provide support like this to our clients, we are assuring them that 60%, I'm sorry, 80, that the funders we're recommending to them are 80% likely to fund because of the research that we've done. So that's really important that you carry out this work. And this next tool is also included in your packet, and it gives you a way to look at each of the funders you might be considering and determine, are they legitimate sources or not, right? So these 8 screens are ways for you to consider, is this a good source for us? And yeah, you have to make sure that this particular source is appropriate across all 8 screens, right? So how much money is needed? Does this funder fund at a level that reflects your request to them? And of course, you can always leverage money, right? You're asking them for 25,000 of a $100,000 project. That's another way to stay within their funding limits. But how much money are they willing to fund based on their history of funding? And then when do you need the money, right? When do you need the resources? Well, of course, the answer is always going to be right now. We need it now. But if you recognize that some of these funders take 6 to 9 months, right, to reply to your grant request, that may not be a good source for you if you need the funding sooner than that. And then how long do you need the money? Is this a 3-year project, a 2-year project, a 1-year project? And are they able to fund multi-year grants, or do they just simply fund 1-year grants? Private sector, mostly 1-year grants. You know that federal funding is oftentimes available for multi-year grants. What's the focus of the project? Do they fund? Do they fund this kind of activity that you're proposing for them? Is the subject matter what you're trying to fund appropriate? And let me give you a quick example of that. When we asked the Gates Foundation to fund the Longhouse at Port Gamble Scalalum, they approved that on an arts and culture basis. They said, yeah, we'll give you $250,000 towards your $1.9 million total, because this will further the arts and culture of the Port Gamble people there at Little Boston Harbor. When we asked the Gates Foundation to support the longhouse at Suquamish, they said, Gates Foundation said, we won't support it on the basis of arts and culture. We'll only support the longhouse project at Suquamish if you can demonstrate that it will enhance or it will increase health indicators, improve health indicators of the Suquamish people. And guess what? Good news, the empirical evidence is there that says if you place a longhouse in a Coast Salish community, it will improve health indicators. And that's why Gates gave $500,000 to that $8 million longhouse there at Suquamish. So what the subject matter is also part of how do you characterize the subject matter. And then the type of support has to do, are you asking for building funds? And of course, in this case, you're asking for building or renovation funds for your facility. You're asking for endowment, you're asking for operating funds. What is the type of support you're asking for? Are you a public-private entity? Do they fund tax support institutions? The geography, do they fund in your geography? And then eligibility. Do you have to be a tribe to apply for this money? Or can you work with a not-for-profit in the area to also be an appropriate applicant? And then finally, do you know anybody at this funder? Do you know a donor? Do you know a member of the board of trustees? Do you know a consultant like myself who works with a number of these funders? Those can give you kind of the end you might need to move forward. But again, these are the kinds of questions you want to ask as you do your research. And I recommend you look at a website called candid.org. There's a whole lot of resources there that would help you with your research. And they have a lot of ways to support your research that way. It's called candid.org. And I'll put that in the chat. Okay, feasibility studies. And I got to move along. I can recognize I'm maybe taking a little bit too much time, but I don't want to skip past too much. Feasibility studies. Do you have to have one for a capital campaign? Are you familiar with feasibility studies? Basically, they're determining if the funding is available and other key information about your potential campaign. In our practice, we make sure that we also look to see what the image of your organization is. We look to see if there's possible volunteer leadership to help support your campaign. But we also, of course, ultimately want to find out within the sampling of our feasibility study, the people we did talk to, would they indicate that you could raise the money needed to build this building? And the other part says often required by funders, but many are not willing to fund these studies. Well, that's true. Oftentimes they'll say we won't entertain a grant request for a capital campaign unless a feasibility study has been done, but we won't fund feasibility studies. And so that kind of puts the mark on you as the applicant to find the money required to carry out these feasibility studies. These are campaign or funding feasibility studies. We would typically interview foundations, corporations, individuals, and others in an effort to give you a report that would say, yeah, this is a feasible project. The funders will step up and support it. There's other volunteers that will help the campaign move forward. And so you should go forward. Or no, there's some things that need to be done before it makes sense to move forward with a campaign. And that's what this last little piece is using the results to determine whether or not to go forward or do additional work before you launch a campaign. You'll need to identify kind of a representative sample of potential funders within all those groups. It's a confidential process. It's usually contracted to an outside vendor. And a test case statement is a key part of this because you're asking people to respond to that test case statement. So be aware that it's going to take, it's time consuming for your contractor, but it could be conducted in about 6 weeks. It's not uncommon to carry out that work in about 6 weeks. And in your packet of materials, I provided you with a copy of a test case statement. So if you're interested in seeing what one of those looks like, I guess I'd urge you to go in that packet. I think she's put the link to the materials in the chat. And so you can pull up a copy of the Suquamish test case statement. It's a simple four-page document that's designed to basically send out to your correspondents and give them a chance to respond to your test case statement. It's kind of a mini version of a case statement you would use if you decided to go forward with the campaign. And there's also in your packet a sample executive summary of a feasibility study. So if you're interested in looking at what the results of a feasibility study might look like, I put a sample executive summary in your materials. You'll be able to look at that. It's just a little over a one-page document that will share what we shared with our client about whether they should go forward with their campaign or not. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these success stories. And kind of what the lessons are that are part of those success stories. This is the beginnings of the museum at the Squaxin Island tribe, and I just want to give credit to them. My home, where I'm talking to you from, is on the reservation at Camilchi, and I'm very proud and appreciative that the tribe has allowed me to have my home here at Camilchi and to be part of this community. In many ways, the Rosebud Sioux tribe and the Squaxin Island tribe are kind of like my home tribes, if you will, and I'm really appreciative of their support of my work and my work with them. So what we've got here is a 13,000 square foot eco museum, and so it's a large facility. Price tag, I'll give you some more information about it with the key information. But this is the very beginning. You can see the infrastructure here. All of those logs were killed, dried at a Canadian facility so that they would not stretch or shrink or what have you over the course of the life of this facility. You can see the Thunderbird icon as part of the porch being developed there. And a lot of this, every square inch of this facility is air conditioned, right? So you can put an archival basket in this facility without any additional protection. The humidity, everything else is controlled. Even the light from the windows is controlled with filters that keep that archival piece protected. You'll notice in this lower right-hand corner, basically a drumming ceremony as the infrastructure was complete. Then the people came forward to drum in the facility and to open, basically to move it to the next phase of construction. So a lot of the cultural imperatives that were part and parcel of the culture of the Squaxin people, the people of the water, were included in the construction of this facility. And it also reflects the 7 idlets from where the people came, or from where people come, I should say. So the 7 families, the 7 inlets are also built into the design. So it's a pretty amazing space about 4 miles from my house. And if you want more information about it, that's their link to their website. This is the building as it is. You'll notice that it's complete and it's part of a larger complex, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But do notice the boardwalk here that goes around the iconic Thunderbird porch. It's part of a water scene. You basically, to your right from the boardwalk, you'll see a whole ocean setting with flowing waters and a place for people to really become calm and reflective. It's a beautiful place. I like to go there just to kind of calm down. That and the Veterans Memorial has that same nature. So a couple other examples that I wanted to share was the Port Gamble Sklallam tribe. And like I say, basically they created a foundation that was part and parcel of their success. I'll talk about that a little bit more today and also again next time. But it's important to recognize that sometimes it's a helpful thing to have a separate nonprofit tax exempt foundation. And we'll talk about how to go about that, like I say, next time. Same thing with the Suquamish tribe. They had a $19 million campaign that used their tribe and foundation as the portals for bringing in support. So, you'll want to take into consideration. I know some of you may already have a foundation that is supportive of your tribe or tribal organization, but if not, you might find some value to go off. I wanted to bring that up for you a little over.
Hey, Don, I think
Uh-huh.
you're breaking up a little bit. You might have to repeat that. I think I think your video went out too. I think your connection
Oh,
a little.
okay. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for letting me.
I think we might have lost Don for, oh, there he is.
Okay, let me share this with you. Okay. I apologize for the delay. I thought this is all set up. Well, I'll get back to that if I'll get a chance.
Okay.
There we go. So yeah, here we go. Thanks. Now you can kind of get an idea what I was talking about. You can see the water feature there. That is part and parcel of this. This is an interior view that includes the gift shop and looks out into this, again, 13,000 square foot facility. Um, and um, One of the things that's most delightful about this space, as I was mentioning, is that the families of each of the inlets, the place where they settled as a family, as a band within the tribe, are reflected in the walls of the facility. And so it's a chance for the families to come to this place and to reflect on the photographs and the language that honors them as part of this tribe, a part of the 7 families that make up the tribe and the 7 inlets that make up the geography of the tribe. Of course, the Squaxin Island itself is a sacred space that's not inhabited, but is a very important place to the
Hey, Don.
Squaxin people. Uh-huh.
Don, I think the slide's still not showing up to where we can see it.
Oh, goodness.
No problem.
There, how about that?
There we go.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Too many screens, only only one hand.
Mhm.
So the thing I think I also want to mention about the Squaxin experience was that there was a committee of people that helped us with this project that were tribal members who stepped forward, retired individuals, other staff members. But this was a good group of people that helped us raise $3.1 million. And the thing I'm really proud of is that some of those same folks, after that campaign, the campaign for the museum was completed, those same folks went out and raised a substantial amount of money to build their Veterans Memorial right adjacent to the museum. So the skill sets that were developed among the people at Squaxin allowed them then to continue to develop and raise funds for other capital projects. And I think that's really important is a capital campaign of this nature should, should empower the organization and the community to continue to do this kind of activity. So let's take a look at the Port Gamble Scalalum House of Knowledge project. It was Mary John's dream that a longhouse be built on the campus of the Port Gamble Scalalum tribe. And I think someone within the cohort is from Port Gamble. You might be able to share additional information, but I was part of that campaign for about 5 years. And as I mentioned before, we raised $5 million for the capital projects that were required. But I think it's really important to take into consideration Elder Mary John's dream because she had held that dream for decades. It was basically a 30-year dream that she had had. And unfortunately, the longhouses, the 14 longhouses that were part of the community there at Port Gamble Scalalum tribe were either burnt to the ground by the Army or bombarded by the Navy and destroyed by the Navy from ships off the bay. So there hadn't been a longhouse in this community for over 100 years. And that was her dream, was to return a longhouse to the community and to make it a hub of the community. So like I mentioned before, my understanding is that, pardon me, a longhouse facility should be seen as a community hub for a Coast Salish community. Looks like I might have a slide that got out of place here. The key to the success here, and with a number of these projects, was that the dreams and vision of the elders is a very important part of this process. The elders should not be left out of any kind of effort you make to raise these kinds of funds. Another key to success at Port Gamble was it's a broad-based dedicated campaign committee. We had over 100 volunteers for that campaign, for that $5 million campaign, half of which were Native people and half were non-Native people that stepped forward to support that campaign. That was a pretty amazing thing to have happen. We had strong support from the council and the tribal administration. The tribal chairman, I will tell you, the tribal chairman kept asking me, can we really raise $5 million for these facilities? And he asked me all the time. And then when we finally dedicated the library portion of the House of Knowledge complex, he finally turned to me as he cut the ribbon and said, well, another key success was innovative special events. We had several innovative special events. And we used, one of the ways we made it innovative was we used facilities that were well known to potential donors. So for example, rather than having the special event at the gym, which was free there, we had the events at the Burke Museum at the University of Washington, the Natural History Museum. Auction, the dinner auction of coastal art would know where the Burke was, where to park, all that, how to get home from there after night. And so that was a really important part of it, having it. But the thing that's really special is that after 2 events at the Burke Museum on the University of Washington campus, those same donors, those same people that came to our special events came to the Longhouse, took a ferry across the water and came to the Longhouse at Port Gamble to celebrate how they the success they had contributed to in the building of that Longhouse facility. So even if you might use an off-reservation facility for a couple of your special events, oftentimes you can bring those donors back and have them help celebrate the building once it's built. And then the last piece that I wanted to talk about in terms of keys to success was regular volunteer updates. We had dinners for the volunteers every quarter, and we gave them first time information about how the campaign was going. And that really got them motivated to continue to be part of the volunteer group. Again, 100 people that were part of that volunteer group. So, um, really important. First longhouse in over 100 years, a new career and education center, a new elder center, and a new Little Boston library were all part of this effort. And we were able to raise the $5 million over the course of about 5 years to build these buildings. And the order was also important, right? The order, we built the longhouse first because we wanted it to be viewed as the hub of this complex, the House of Knowledge complex. Career Education Center came next, Elder Center next, and then the library was the final building. The Elder Center, just to let you know, I know this is not exactly on topic, but the Elder Center, at the time their Elder Center would hold 12 people. They had 134 elders. So they couldn't even feed them lunch at the same time. The new 4,000 square foot building comes with a living room, a fireplace, a very comfortable place for the elders to be and enjoy their company. And another fact and figure, Ray Johnston was the architect in collaboration with a guy named James Cutler. Some other keys to success I wanted to share was, again, that foundation. Having that foundation was also important. Using local resources, reservation resources, the infrastructure of the longhouse came from logs on reservation. And then the resurgence among the young people. That's what I was talking about when I talked about the idea of the impact the building would have. To be frank about it, there were kids up at the Shell station doing the gang signs, wearing the bandanas, doing that whole thing. And as the longhouse was being built, they basically came down to the carving shed where the elders stayed, and they said, teach us our songs and dances, teach us our language. We want to be part of the longhouse family. That's the thing I'm talking about when it comes to impact. The building is beautiful, 5,700 square feet, built in a traditional style, but that impact, those young people who are now leaders of the song and dance group at Port Gamble, were basically drawn because that longhouse was built there on the reservation. That's in my experience, having done this for so long, that's the real payback, if you will, is to see the young people re-engage and become part of the celebration and resurgence of the culture. And yeah, just to reiterate, there was a tremendous amount of local support for their efforts. Special events, yep, you got to have them. They're a part of it. And the special events at Port Gamble probably raised about $100,000 toward their $5 million goal. So not a big piece of it, but it was also a way to get people excited, and it would help people consider making a donation to the effort. The foundation itself was converted from an old development fund that had remained dormant. Initially, the foundation was staffed by tribal employees, and there was an agreement between the foundation and the tribe for accounting and other services, where the tribe would provide the foundation other services. Again, we'll talk about that in more detail next time. And there is a link there for you if you want more information about the foundation. Having the foundation gave them access to funding that wouldn't otherwise be available. So, for example, the state of Washington provided funding that would not be available to the tribe. Only the not-for-profit could apply to that particular pot of money from the state to help pay for these facilities. And of course, the special events were also sponsored by the foundation. Local residents, insurance broker made two $1,000 gifts to help build the longhouse. And a number of people also donated to the library. And this is kind of just a quick slideshow for you to see some of the photographs. This is the beginnings. You'll see the rough-hewn logs that were getting harvested from the reservation. This is the song and dance group I was telling you about. This is the interior of the longhouse with this 35-foot panel that actually was kept at the Burke Museum until the building was built, and then was brought back to provide a backdrop for the facility. This is another shot of the interior looking out to the east. You'll notice the 6-foot risers that are there for people to accommodate people who want to sleep in the longhouse. This was Lori Matson, who was the executive director of the foundation and also the project coordinator. This is the west entrance with a carved door. This is the kind of still the mud days where the landscaping wasn't complete, but those were people entering into the west side with the totems that were carved locally. Oh, by the way, the totems were paid for by the National Park Service, a $60,000 grant to hire local carvers to carve the totems. That's the east side with the totems, welcoming. This is the guy I talked with you about, Ron Charles, greeting visitors. He was the guy who kept asking me, can we really raise this money? These are the architects, 2 of the architects that were part of the project. And this is the elders who named the House of Knowledge. This is a young dancer with a salmon mask. They were the young people were an active part of the dedication. A couple of the carvers that were honored. More of the carvers and the young people that were part of the dancing group. An honoring dance that was conducted during the grant dedication. David Boxley from up in Alaska was also part of the group that helped teach and do some of the carving. You may know his name. And this is the library portion. Again, the library was the last of the 4 buildings, but it is a very special library because of the collection of native materials that it has, and it is an open and access library. It's also special because it's staffed by the Kitsap Regional Library. The library district provides the staff and the stacks and that, but it's built on a reservation land, and it's a reservation. It's a tribal building. Okay, so let's move on to the Suquamish tribe, and this is a $19 million campaign with 3 components: an early learning center, a house of awakened culture, and a museum. Right, the museum was the last. The early learning center got funded first, and so it was built first. It's a learning center for small children, but it's special because it also has its own longhouse. So the kids can go through a portal out of the learning center into a small longhouse and have longhouse activities in that attached longhouse. It's not the House of Awakened Culture is a 12,000 square foot facility. That is there overlooking the water, looking out toward Seattle, and then the museum, 9,000 square foot museum. Again, the project total was about 19 million. This is the Longhouse, the House of Awakened Culture being constructed there on Agate Pass. And the Learning Center started out with groundbreaking. I'm especially proud of this picture because we had the little kids who are going to be served by the Learning Center all dressed up with hard hats and shovels, and they're the ones who did the groundbreaking, just to get them involved right from the beginning. Of course, the elders were consulted about this whole project before anything happened, but this is the little kids having a hand using the golden shovels to shovel dirt and get the land ready for building the Marion Foreman Boucher Early Learning Center. So we're really excited to see this get this started. The facts and figures here: $19 million campaign over 5.5 years. So it was, again, this is not something that happened overnight. $7 million was raised from non-tribal sources. Okay, so $12 million came from the tribe, including its enterprises. So $19 million basically split, with the $7 million coming from non-tribal sources. The Learning Center was about $4.8 million. The 12,000 square foot longhouse, about $8 million. And the 9,000 square foot museum at $6.5 million. The architects for the longhouse and museum were Mithun architects out of Seattle. So that was the group that did both the longhouse facility and the museum. Keys to success for this project: strong support from the tribal chairman and council. I don't know if you're familiar with Leonard Forsman, um, but he's been a very strong leader for that tribe for years and years. And he was an active member of not only the tribal council, but he was also chaired the Suquamish Foundation, which we helped them create as part of this process. Broad and strong support from the community. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Suquamish, but one of the tragedies that occurred there a long time ago was the burning down of the old man house, Chief Sealth's longhouse facility there on the water. And that had always caused a lot of friction in that community. When we first came to Suquamish, Leonard was concerned that nobody would step up and help them raise this money, because the Suquamish tribe is the Oliphant tribe. All these other factors are going on, and maybe there won't be the support they need to raise $19 million. But what we found out was that no, that wasn't the case at all. The number of good-hearted people stepped up and said, yeah, we're going to help you. We're going to help you raise this money. And in part, that longhouse became a way of replacing Old Man House that had been, again, burnt to the ground. It became kind of a place, not a replacement, of course, but a new house. And the campaign talked about resurgence, the idea of things that have not ever gone away, but they're going to resurge through the development of these buildings, including the 12,000 square foot longhouse facility. Other keys to success were the Suquamish Foundation. And here again, we'll talk about this more next time, but having a nonprofit portal, having a way for Seattle, in this case, Seattle-based funders, to make a gift to a 501c3 rather than a direct gift to the tribe made a huge difference in our ability to raise $7 million of non-tribal money toward the $19 million total. Another thing that was a key to success was a tour of funders in advance of the campaign. They literally rented a bus and put representatives of various funders in the Northwest on the bus, and they drove them around to various reservations and showed them what's going on and gave them a firsthand knowledge of what the needs might be and how those funders might be able to help support those addressing those needs in those tribal communities. So it wasn't something about, okay, hey, you don't know anything about us. It was, hey, come and spend time, have lunch on our reservation, talk to our people, talk to our elders, talk to our tribal council, get a firsthand experience with who we are and what we're about. And that made a difference. That made a difference when it came to going to Gates Foundation and asking for money for the Learning Center and also for the Longhouse. They gave $850,000 total toward both of those projects. And yeah, admittedly, we were lucky to have strong support from the Seattle community. And not everybody has that kind of a wealthy community to provide the support, but that was a factor in stepping forward from an urban community to provide support for a rural project there at Suquamish. And then again, the signature special events. We had Carlos Nakai and Kealona Beamer at one of our events. They donated their time to come and play slack key Hawaiian guitar and a native flute at an event at one of the tribal facilities. That was a big event, and it brought some dollars in to help raise the funds needed for that project. But special events are labor intensive. I'm sure many of you know that. And you have to kind of balance out how much time and energy are you going to put into an event, and what kind of reward do you want to get from that event. But I think bringing people into a special event is a way of broadening the base of appeal to a much broader audience who might consider making a donation to your effort. And this is the Longhouse. This was part of the dedication. This was a Hawaiian dance group came to help celebrate the Longhouse facility. You can see here, this is the east gate of the facility. The other side has doors that open up like a large garage door would open up. So you can open it up to a open air style facility. This is the museum. This was the design that was originally developed for the museum, and this is an example of the actual museum itself. And I want to spend a little more time on the museum because that's, I think, is a major concern of interest to you. The former tribal museum was 3,500 square feet. It was built into the old tribal center. And it was a beautiful place, but it was pretty well tucked away and not very accessible to a number of people. So in this case, they decided that they wanted to expand to a 9,000 square foot facility. So almost tripling the size of this facility. Now, when it comes to that, you know, if you're asking the funders to put money into a facility that's 3 times the current facility, they're going to want to know some important information from you. You know, for example, they're going to want to know, can you afford to operate and maintain a larger facility? And the Allen Family Foundation there in Seattle asked that exact question. We ended up hiring a company to come in and do a project feasibility study to determine whether or not there was enough interest and support for a 9,000 square foot museum. And the good news is that group, RMG Associates, came back and said, if you build this 9,000 square foot facility, you will increase your patronage from 3,000 or so per year to 15 to 20,000 patrons per year. And you can imagine what the impact that had, right, for funders who were considering putting money into this project. To see that kind of growth in the patronage was going to be huge, was going to be huge. So they spent time talking about it from that standpoint. They also developed support from the Burke Museum because a lot of the collection that was supposed to be at Suquamish was being held at the Burke. And so the relationship between the Burke Museum of Natural History and the tribe was really an important relationship. And the result was promised by the Burke that once this building was built, all of the Suquamish material would be transferred to the tribe. And that also gave us additional reasons why people should support this particular museum. That is to give it the ability to carry and hold and care for all of the collection. The other thing that was important was that people in the community were holding items that they didn't feel they wanted to donate to the tribal museum until this facility was built. And so the executive director, you know, had a special challenge, which was people coming forward to basically, you know, offer a basket, offer other collectibles that the museum would protect and keep safe for the community to observe and to enjoy. So this museum became a real transformative force within the community, and it really gave people an opportunity to learn more and more about, you know, who they are as a people and what does the future look like. So we've looked at these examples, Squaxin, Port Gamble, and Suquamish, and what are the commonalities? What are the things that are consistent throughout? Well, one of those is the vision of the elders and the support of the elders. In my view, that's really an important part. And frankly, I wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward on any of these projects until I'd gone to an elders lunch and, you know, had the lime jello with the pear in it, and, you know, enjoy the food and to have a chance to chat with the elders and get their insights. When it came to Suquamish, we asked the elders, for example, to tell us when they were growing up on the reservation, what was important. Picture what was important. And they told us about the longhouse. They told us about the welcoming dock. And they told us, you know, and the welcoming dock was something that we were not aware of. They told us about the ball field, because at that time, baseball was really important. And it continues to be important for Suquamish people. So we asked them what was important when they were children growing up. And then we asked them, what's important now? as elders, what do you see as important? And so they said, for example, that there's no more welcoming dock. We don't have the ability to welcome visitors in the way we were used to doing. So the welcoming dock became part of that $19 million campaign. Same thing, of course, with the longhouse. And the longhouse was developed with the guidance of the elders. Um, they were even a part of some of the walking trail, the restoration, the development of Chief Sealth's grave was also part of the overall project. So tremendous wisdom and guidance that came from the elders is really an important part of this. Another part of it is the capacity building for the sponsoring organization first. And again, we'll touch on this in more detail next time, but having these different portals, being able to apply for funding, not just through the tribe or village or corporation, but also through other groups and other organizations that are supportive of the project, can be a way of expanding and enhancing your ability to raise funds. Clear articulation of the project. Like I say, my experience is when you sit down with the tribal council and other leaders and say, okay, what's this project all about? What are you trying to accomplish with this project? Sometimes, just asking that question and trying to get clear about that is a great way of really expanding what that project's all about, and maybe making it more responsive to the needs of the community, especially if you're using as part of that process the community assessment process, going out into the community and being actively engaged with the community, using the wisdom of the community to help articulate the project as well. Careful and thoughtful funding research. That's an important part of this whole thing. And don't waste your time, taking all the time and energy preparing funding applications to funders that probably aren't going to be willing to consider that kind of an application. You got better things to do with your time than applying to funding sources that really aren't the best possible sources for you. And you can do that by carrying out really careful and thoughtful funding research. And again, I would refer you back to that candid.org. There's a lot of resources there that will help you use the tools that they offer to identify potential funding sources. The good news about Candid is it does bring together both foundation, corporation, and government sources when it comes to doing your research. And of course, competitive, collaborative applications, that's an important part of this, making sure that the applications are strong. And we'll be talking about that some more as well next time, but just recognize that that is a part of the thing that made all of these campaigns successful, was we put out very strong applications. For example, at Suquamish, they have 4 grant writers. They had 4 grant writers on staff, but they asked us to prepare the capital request funding applications working with those 4 grant writers, so that there was kind of a collaborative effort with the grant office and with our company to provide or create these competitive applications. Another thing is the multiplicity of funding sources. These campaigns from museums or libraries or what have you aren't going to come from a single source. They're not going to be funded with a single source typically. They're going to require a multiplicity of funding sources. So for the Suquamish campaign, for example, of that $19 million, $1 million of that was an appropriation from the Washington State Legislature. I actually personally lobbied with Leonard Forsman. The original bill was $3 million. We ultimately got $1 million toward that longhouse. A portion of the $8 million longhouse facility was paid. $1 million of that was paid for with an appropriation from the state of Washington. Like I said, Gates put in $850,000 toward the buildings. A couple other private foundations in Seattle put in hundreds of thousands of dollars toward the overall project. And so if you're wanting to be successful, that's the approach you want to take. You want to take into consideration all the possible funding sources and be creative about it. Don't limit what you think might be possible when it comes to funding sources. The innovative special events, Again, that's another key to success that I think you want to take into consideration. Broad and strong community support, and broad and strong community support comes from engaging the community early on in the project. We, for example, have just finished a feasibility study recently for the Western Shoshone tribes there in Nevada. And we did 8 listening sessions of each one of those 8 tribes. We went out to each of those tribes and conducted community listening sessions to help articulate that cultural center project there. It'll probably be placed in Elko, Nevada. So, you know, we talked to large and small groups, but we gave them, you know, an opportunity to share their wisdom and insights in the development of that cultural center, which again will likely be placed in Elko. And then the last piece of this item, empowering tribes and tribal members and others to continue the work after this particular project's completed. It's the old, you know, do I give somebody a fish, or do I teach them how to fish? And our approach, and I think you'll find it successful as well, is engaging tribal people to be part of the process, and using their skill sets and their wisdom and their experience, just like we did when we provided the support to the Squaxin Museum. That the people that were part of that campaign committee, the tribal members that are part of that campaign committee, like I said before, went forward and raised substantial thousands of dollars to build a beautiful Veterans Memorial. And they had that sense of pride and investment in their community, taking the skill sets that they developed in working with us on these campaigns. So there should be some of that reward that comes to the people that are helping you with your campaigns. And of course, you know, what you're looking for when it comes to multiplicity of funding sources, the private and public grants, government grants, contracts, and earmarks, individual giving, annual funds, special events, and earned income. You should be looking at all those sources as possible sources for your project. And you know, when I say individual giving, that's a little bit different, right? That's a little bit, you know, going out and asking an individual to write a check to your project. But at Port Gamble, I can remember a couple of those volunteers went out to ask a guy named Larry Nakata, a Japanese American guy who owns 6 supermarkets in our area. They asked him to make a gift of $100,000, a personal gift of $100,000. And they did it just right. They followed the process we like to recommend to them. They didn't say anything about, and hey, if 100,000 is too much, you know, could you do 75? They didn't do any of that. They just said, Mr. Nakata, we'd like to ask you for an investment in our Longhouse campaign for $100,000. And they paused, and he finally turned to them and said, you know what? I really appreciate the way you asked me for that donation. I really appreciate that. You didn't come in to me and say, well, you know, whatever you can do would be great. You know, if 100's too much, let me know what you can do. No. Would you make an investment of $100,000? He said, I can't make a gift of $100,000, but I can give you $10,000 personally, and you can come pick up the check in 2 weeks. Come back to the store, and I'll have the check ready for you in 2 weeks. Okay, well, $10,000 toward a $5 million goal. But the rest of the story is that he also invited us to meet with his board of directors of the company that owns those 6 stores. And we asked them for a gift of $50,000 from the company. And the company also gave $50,000 toward that campaign. Right? So Mr. Nakata made a personal gift of $10,000, and his company gave an additional $50,000. So don't discount these different sources. I know you say, well, oftentimes the tribes are just used to government contracts and grants. That's all we know. But the way to really help ensure your success is to look at private and public grants, as well as individual giving, as well as special events, as a way of broadening the base of those who might fund you. So that's, I wanted to leave some time for questions and answers. So this is that time. Again, a reminder that a lot of the materials that are in your packet will give you more detail about all the things that I've talked about today, but I wanted to kind of cover these key points with you. And then I definitely want to hear from you questions that I might have generated based on the presentation.
All right, thank you, Don. So what questions do we have?
I see Matt Reed's got his hand raised. Go ahead, Matt.
And this is for you or anybody else in the audience that's went through this process. You know, as you're raising these large amount of money for these cultural centers or museums, like, did you run into problems with tribal finance departments and how that money gets put into the tribe, or was it all completely separate? If you could just kind of address that.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, in the case of these tribal foundations that we help create,
Uh-huh.
so let's just take the example of the Suquamish Foundation. That was a brand spanking new foundation that was set up. It was chartered by the tribe using its Article 3 of its constitution to establish the Suquamish tribe. So it was not incorporated by the state of Washington. It was incorporated by the tribe. And it had a majority of the board members were from the tribe, a minority of the board members were from the community. So it was a really beautiful blend of tribe and broader community on that board of directors, or board of governors. And then once the foundation was created in that way, we went to the IRS and we asked it to be characterized as a 501c3 nonprofit tax exempt organization. So that process got completed. And then we created an agreement between that separate legal entity. The Suquamish Foundation had a contract with the Suquamish tribe, and that's called a quid pro quo contract, or something for something. You give, we give, a quid pro quo relationship. And what happened there was the foundation promised to provide the tribe with additional resources to help them with the funds that are needed to build these buildings. And in exchange for that, the tribe promised the foundation it would provide accounting services and an executive director of the foundation. So that's how that got sorted out. And then, of course, in the case of the accounting being done for the foundation, the tribe established separate and distinct accounting for the foundation's books.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't any commingling until it was time for the foundation to make a donation to the tribe for the actual construction of the building. So once the money had been raised to build the building, then the foundation basically said, we're going to release the money we've raised and give it to the tribe, and then the tribe could commingle that money to help pay for the construction costs.
All right, thank you.
That makes sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense.
All right, great. What's the next question, please?
Any other questions?
Any other questions? I'm going to broaden my base here so I can, if you need to raise your hand physically, that's okay too.
I have a question, kind of ties in from the previous one.
Sure, Selena.
So we're a smaller tribe. So right now we do not have a nonprofit entity other than our school that works with the tribe.
Sure.
And so my question is, when these tribes are developing these additional foundations to help with their funding, has there ever been, or have you ever identified potential conflicts of interest in regards to the members of the foundation who are working with the tribe, or tribal council members or anything like that, that you can maybe give some words of wisdom or to follow?
Sure. Well, I mean, when we set up these tribal foundations, they're for real. They're not kind of a committee or kind of a second guest kind of an organization. So when we had the Suquamish Foundation, we went through education and training of their legal duties and responsibilities. Each members of the foundation's board sign a conflict of interest policy statement that they agree to. The board members are asked to make their personal gift to the campaign, as part of their responsibilities as a board member of the foundation of whatever size they are able to afford. So for example, one of the gentlemen gave a pledge of what was it, uh, $32 a month, $32 a month for 3 years, about $1,800. Okay, his income was $320 a month Social Security, but he pledged 10% of his Social Security toward that Longhouse campaign. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you make the decision to have this foundation, you get the benefit of that nonprofit portal, and you get the benefit of giving people a tax deduction if they make their gift to the foundation. But it has to be treated, it has to be treated in a serious way that have quarterly meetings, you have a quorum that shows up. And if the majority of the members are council members or part of that council group, then they have to respect the minority as well when it comes to the people from the community that are also dedicating their time to the work of the foundation. The part of this is making sure that the tribe maintains control, right? So that things don't go way out of kilter. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the people from the community who are part of the foundation board feel like their voices are heard, and that's what encourages them to go out and raise money, funds for the project. The guy I talked about, the non-native individual with the insurance broker, who gave two $1,000 checks to the Port Gamble campaign, right? Felt a desire to provide that kind of a donation, $2,000 in cash, because he kind of caught fire with how important that Longhouse Elder Center, Education Center, and library was to the community, right? And he didn't feel like he was kind of shoved off to one side. He was an active volunteer. And so because he was an active volunteer, he gained a level of ownership in the project that also then led him to make these two $1,000 gifts.
And how long did the setting up the infrastructure for the foundation take before they could actually start working towards the capital campaign?
The fastest I've done one of those for a client was a month and a half, 2 months. I know it sounds like, just to be honest, Selena, I also know people that have tried to start that process, and 3 years later, they're still trying to work it through. I'm not trying to
say a month's really fast.
Yeah, it was 6 weeks. It was 6 weeks. But that's not a commercial. So, it's not a commercial. I'm just saying that with professional help, you could maybe speed that process up. I think, 4 months is a reasonable time frame to make that happen. And, honestly, for all of these campaigns, by having the foundation in place, it makes it more comfortable for these private sector funders to cut a check to the campaign. And look, folks, they understand. They know that if they give the money to the foundation, they know that down the road it's going to be commingled with other money from the tribe. They know that. This is not a hide the ball kind of thing. They realize that the tribe is raising money through its own resources, and the foundation is also raising money. At some point, the money all goes into a pot, and it's used for construction. And you have to think about it that way. Who's the best applicant, right? If you're going for federal government money, right? Maybe the tribe is the best applicant because you don't need the benefit of a nonprofit to apply to the government, right? But on the other hand, if you're applying to a foundation or a corporation, maybe sometimes it's better to think about that. Well, again, we'll talk about that in more detail next time when it comes to actually setting up the foundations. So I'm just as a little bit of a teaser, Selena.
Janan, thank you for answering.
Oh, of course. What else? What's about the next question?
Let's see, Tim he wrote in the chat, let's see. If you already have an existing facility, such as in our case, a tribal college, and have raised funds for construction of a library and archives before from a multiplicity of mostly government sources, might the same approach work for cultural center/museum? And is all the fundraising for construction necessary, or maybe just for operating expenses?
Oh, okay. Great question. Yeah, we did work with the Coeur d'Alene tribe and North Idaho College, looking at a community building and a longhouse facility there on their campus. And the tribe decided to move forward with a reservation-based facility rather than use the land there at at the North Idaho College. uh, Basically adding to an existing infrastructure is one way to kind of keep the costs down, because you can use the HVAC and other infrastructure components of that base building, if you will, as a way of supporting and reducing the cost of adding another wing, if you will, or another component. I know the Northern Nevada Museum in Elko does exactly that. They built wings and wings and wings of their museum, but they've continued to use the same infrastructure um, for a number of wings within that facility. Um, but when it comes to just focusing on building the buildings and using the fundraising for operating expense, I think that's possible, but I'm a strong believer in using a variety of sources for, to raise the money needed to build the renovation or the building, and then also looking at other sources that might provide support for the operations and maintenance. Because as I indicated in that section on researching the funding sources, it's important to recognize that just because they support a culturally appropriate building, they may not be interested in operating expense. They may be only interested and providing funding for the construction of that building. And once they've got the construction completed, that's the end of their active involvement. Whereas others might say, well, we would be interested in providing some endowed funds that would then allow you to draw from the endowment and pay for the operating expense through the endowment. You have to be really sensitive to the sort of the nuances that these funders share with you when it comes to what are they willing to fund, and take them at face value on that basis.
Okay.
What else? What else have you got?
Any other questions?
Clear as mud, as Grandma would say. So you'll have an opportunity, I think, Melissa, if I'm not mistaken, the PowerPoint will be available. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll looks like I need to do a little bit of updating on that before we distribute it in its final form. I understand this is your ninth. This is your ninth webinar, and so I appreciate your attentiveness and your interest in the questions. I hope that today was helpful in kind of looking at successful tribal campaigns and what kinds of things made them successful. Next time we'll be looking at how to get organized for creating a successful campaign. And then in the third section of our presentation, we'll be looking at basically the tools. How do you organize? How do you develop the committees? All the things that are part and parcel of actually implementing a successful campaign. And so I hope you'll be interested in being a part of those two presentations as well. And thank you again for the privilege of spending time with you and sharing some of the information that I thought might be useful to you.
Thank you very much, Don. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday. Have a great rest of the week.
All right, enjoy. Thanks.